Welcome to Femme Furious, a podcast where pop culture meets a feminine framing. I am your host, Julia Rose Portela, and today we are closing the mother gate once and for all. But before we do that, let me tell you how you can follow the pod. You can follow on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Quick programming reminder. I have the podcast currently listed on YouTube, and I'm having some conflicting feelings about the values that I hold and the way that money is getting directed on YouTube right now. So I think I am going to open up a free tier on the Patreon, and this will just be video uploads. I'm not doing that yet, but I will be doing that. But for now, I'm going to pause and stop putting the podcast on YouTube right now. Anyway, so keep your ears peeled for that. The best way to do that is to join the Lipstick and Lore newsletter. We can dive deeper in on there. You can always follow on Instagram at Femme Furious Pod, and you can send me an email with your thoughts and your feelings and your opinions and your theories about Stranger Things Season 5. You can send all of that over to femmeandfuriouspod@gmail.com. Okay, let's take a cheek peek at this episode. This is your spoiler warning for this episode. So we are talking today about Season 2, Episodes 7 through 9. But I know definitively that I will be talking about future seasons of Stranger Things, particularly Season 4. So if you have not watched all the way up to there, just be mindful as you're listening. Obviously, these are just quick recaps for the most part, but I do want to acknowledge up top that I will be going into some later seasons as this episode goes on. All right, let's get into today's Femme Frame, where we will dive into key feminist themes, history, cultural context, and more. Let's talk about something that is one of my favorite things in the world, as you will come to understand if you listen to this podcast, and one of my favorite things that happens in this stretch of episodes, and something that has an overarching pure energy, and it's a romance novel. I don't mean any romance novel, I mean the ones that had us clutching them at night, or, they've evolved since then, but now you could use a whole vibrator and have an entire fantasy with your book boyfriend, but at that time, you would be blushing under your covers, and you would be wondering why your hearts weren't just set ablaze themselves. And so Karen in Stranger Things reads this book in the bathtub. It is called Heart of Thunder by Johanna Lindsey, and that's not just a background prop, that's a symbol of the 80s. Because the 80s weren't just about big hair and neon leg warmers, although perks. It was a moment of cultural tension for women. More women were entering the workforce. They were negotiating for their independence, and yet society still expected women at that time to obsess over love and marriage and keeping your man happy. So romance novels became more popular in the space of feminism and this reclamation of autonomy and sexuality. They were messy, they were emotional, and they were unapologetically centered on women's desire, which is why book talk, I think, has had such a rise right now in this new wave of feminism that we're having. By the 1980s, romance novels were everywhere. Mills and Boon in the UK had already set the stage, but in the US we had authors like Johanna Lindsey, which is what we see in the show, Judith McNaught, and Sandra Brown. They were dominating the New York Times bestselling list. Lindsay's Heart of Thunder is a classic. It is a sweeping historical romance, a strong hero, passionate heroine, and all of the tension of forbidden love, but of course with agency, which is, again, what makes romance novels and the books that we are saying on Book Talk so poignant. Here's the thing. These books were marked as escapist entertainment, but what they really offered was emotional literacy. Nothing has changed. This is what we are experiencing now. This is why I wanted to do this Femme Frame. They gave women a way to explore desire, consent, and negotiation in relationships and power dynamics in a contained and safe space. Does that sound familiar to you if you read books from Book Talk? You could read about a hero who was domineering but ultimately tender and still grapple with your feelings about control, autonomy, and vulnerability. Once again, sound familiar? It also should sound a little bit like the Mind Flayer, but instead of it being psychological and connected to control, it's more sexy than terrifying. The 80s romance novel boom coincided with the rise of women-centric marketing. Bookstores started to put entire sections dedicated to this. There were book clubs that were exploding, and there were women that were talking openly about what they wanted, not just what society told them that they should desire. There's something really revolutionary about how the romance novel started to take root in a profound cultural way in the 80s. So think about Karen sitting in her bathtub with her candlelight, devouring Heart of Thunder. She is a typical 80s woman navigating her own agency, especially in what is clearly a sexless marriage. And this novel is giving her permission to feel strongly and passionately and unapologetically. And she's obviously doing it privately. There is something private about it, but it is a private act of rebellion, reading about women who were so unlike them, these women in the 80s, who got what they want in these worlds that were often rigid and patriarchal. And that was the mirror that they experienced back in these historical romances, historical novels. It's what we are experiencing in book talk today. And I think there's something really feminist about bodice ripping. Just saying. Even the style of these books is something to note. They are lush descriptions, first-person emotional intimacy, prolonged tension, and it trains you to feel empathy and to negotiate your own desires in the imagination, and to understand that passion and intellect can coexist. These novels became training grounds for emotional resilience. So, yes, they were escapist, but escapism has power in certain contexts. And in the 80s, the economic pressures, the Cold War, the shifting of gender norms, the rising of divorce rates, all created a collective anxiety about the future. Sound familiar? Romance novels allowed women to explore personal agency in a safe but intense way. So the next time you see someone reading a romance novel, particularly a period piece, because that's what happened to be popular in the 80s, or in real life, remember, it is not just fluff, it is strategic, empathic training, and it is rebellion bound in paper and ink with a hot Fabio on the cover, and honestly, that is just iconic. Okay, let's get into our quickie today. We are covering episodes 7, 8, and 9, closing out season 2. So we will start with chapter 7, The Lost Sister, written by Justin Dauble and directed by Rebecca Thomas. Let's talk about it. It is an episode that I like to call Everyone Wants to Skip It, but you can't because it's technically, I guess, canon. If I was not covering this show in this context, I would have skipped this in a rewatch. Here we have Elle leaving Hawkins in search for another girl that she saw in Terry's vision, her quote-unquote sister, Callie. She finds her, but not before overhearing her aunt trying to get in touch with someone about her whereabouts, which sets off the usual 11 response. Run first, ask questions later. When Elle reconnects with Callie, we realize that Callie has fallen in with a group of misfits who seem to have channeled their trauma into armed robbery and DIY punk aesthetics. So Callie, who can manipulate perception, can make people see what she wants them to see, takes Elle under her wing and tries to teach her how to use her anger as a source of her power. And then we get a makeover montage, very 80s. Not as cool as the one that she has with Max in season 3, but, whatever. This is where Elle gets her slick back style, her smoky-eyed bitchin' new look that just absolutely screams is MTV rebellion. It's great. I love it. When Elle and Callie use their powers together to track down a man who tortured Terry, Elle's mom, Callie pushes for vengeance and Elle ends up hesitating in the last minute. She can't do it. Her empathy breaks through her rage, and it is a moment that puts the two sisters at odds, but ultimately realigns Elle with who she is at her core, which I suppose is the point of this episode, though I think there's other ways that we can get to this point without having this whole side quest. It is that she values love over hate, connection over control, and the episode ends with Elle realizing that she has to go home. Not obviously to the lab, not with Callie, but to the people who actually love her. and that is the people that are in Hawkins. On paper and like in theory, the Lost Sister is conceptually a cool idea. What about the other kids that were being tested in the lab? We don't see any from season 1, but you can get the feeling that there are other kids. And so the Lost Sister is answering a question that we have, which is, were other kids like Elle being tested? And if so, where are they? And on top of that, it's got all the ingredients of a good feminist coming of age story. It's 2 girls reclaiming their power after years of male exploitation. It's road tripping kind of vibes. It is glam punk rebellion. But in practice, this episode feels disjointed and is, I believe, still, though I haven't checked this, but I'm pretty sure I can confirm this, is the lowest rated Stranger Things episode ever. It's like not well received by fans, wasn't really well received by critics, and they know this because they kind of continue to skip over it. They mention Callie, I believe, once more in season 4, but that's really it. They don't really touch back on this. And again, conceptually, it's a good idea. Execution-wise, it feels weird, and it's weird in where it's placed in the season. Like, we're just getting to the crux of stuff, and then we take this big break. And we don't hang out with any of our other main characters from Hawkins. We're just with Elle and these other people that we're not really invested in and that we're not really continuing to build investment in because Elle leaves them by the end of this episode. But still, I think there's something worth unpacking in this episode, and it's that this is Stranger Things' experiment with female rage. And Stranger Things has a really good way of micro-dosing a concept to see how fans will take it in order to explore it more deeply elsewhere. So I'll talk about this kind of like as they come up, I suppose, instead of giving a bunch of examples, because a lot of them come from future seasons, especially season 3 and season 4. But here, I feel like there is a real experiment with female rage. And it's not like Stranger Things has shied away from it, but it happens in a really different way. And I feel like there was something here about testing the appetite for revenge against the lab. So Callie embodies this idea of living angry. Her entire identity is built on vengeance. And she's not wrong to be angry. She's just trapped in it. It's like a cage for her. Elle, on the other hand, can feel angry, but often doesn't stay there. Her power is her emotional elasticity. So she can rage, and we see her do that, but she can also return to softness and to care and to connection. And that's really where Elle becomes a hero instead of an anti-hero. And I think that's something that this episode is looking to explore through the lens of like female rage. So Callie represents this myth of liberation, and we experience that in her narrative through this like freedom through destruction. But Elle represents a quieter kind of liberation, which is choosing compassion or forgiveness or understanding or acceptance when hate would be so much easier. And that's where the tension sits in this episode. So for all of its flaws, the episode does force us to confront a cultural question that still matters, which is women's power only legible and digestible when it's loud and violent and punk in this way? Or can it also look like forgiveness and restraint and community? And I think that is something that, especially the idea of like power in community, I think that's something that Stranger Things is really interested in exploring and has been since season 1. And honestly, the best stories are the ones that do this. Like when it comes to like, for example, Gossip Girl or The OC, they are taking us through a main character who is finding belonging in a group that they don't canonically belong to. And that's Elle in Stranger Things. There is already a party of 4, and we see how in adding Elle, they actually end up adding Hopper to it. They end up adding Joyce, Nancy, and Steve to it, and then in later seasons, other people. So it's something really interesting because the community continues to expand out, but our entry point to that and our expansion of the original circle is all through Elle. And I think there is real power in community, and I think that is something that this show in general is really interested in exploring. The aesthetic of The Lost Sister is pure girl power cinema, like from the 80s, if we're going with like the bad girl. It's got the leather jackets, it's got the eye makeup, it's got that anti-hero energy. They have that part where they put the masks on. Anytime that people wear masks, especially like children masks, like they give Elle like the little baby face, that shit fucking freaks me out more than the Mind Flayer. I don't know why. Sorry. There is a part of me that, like, the book talk girly in me, the dark romance reader, like, I see videos of, for example, people that have posted on TikTok or Instagram about going to Hogwarts and seeing the Death Eaters, and they're like these thirst-trapped Death Eaters. Sorry if you're not deep into book talk like I am. That shit, like, freaks me out and also kind of turns me on. But, like, when it's, like, these types of masks, like, these, like, baby or, like, weird animals, like, that shit freaks me the fuck out. I don't like Halloween. I don't like when people show up wearing masks. I don't like the scream mask. I don't like the masks. I don't like that Elle puts on this little baby face with a It freaks me out. It's scarier than the Mind Flayer. I hate this episode specifically for that reason alone. But I think, you know, what is also really interesting about Callie and Elle's dynamic is that Callie sees in Elle what she has lost. She has lost her innocence, she has lost her empathy, and she blames Elle for taking her choice away as a form of coping and a form of projection with a larger issue, which is the fact that Brenner and the lab completely absolved all of these children, particularly Callie and Elle, of any autonomy at all. So she tries to rewrite Elle in her own image, but Elle pushes back against this. And that's what Elle's own form of reclamation looks like in this episode. That resistance, honestly, is the best part of this episode because Elle doesn't have a sense of identity. She really doesn't. She had this lab that she's known her entire life. Then she had this group of boys that she kind of like lived in one's basement for a little bit and started to build some friendships. But for the past year, basically, she has not had that community. She's only had Hopper. And she's been formed in Hopper's image, for the most part, as his daughter. So she is finally getting this taste of who she actually wants to be when she's not being forced into situations where she's has to be molded to fit those circumstances. And I think that's what's so important about Elle's journey throughout this episode, and I suppose that's why it's in this season at all. It feels like it's not about rejecting anger, but it's about refusing to let it define you. And I think that is something that Elle needs to learn, especially as we come into season 4. And I think will be pivotal into going into season 5. We shall see. When Elle returns to Hawkins, it is moral clarity. She has learned that power without love is just another cage. And letting somebody else project their stuff onto you is just another cage. So personally, even though I hate this episode and would have skipped it, I think hate maybe is a strong word, but I always have this like inkling when I watch this episode to like get on with the real story, quote unquote. And in this period of time when we only get like 9 episodes a season, 8 episodes a season, having one full episode be such a miss and so disconnected from the plot as a whole feels like daylight robbery. It feels like a detour that never really earns its emotional stakes. But that frustration is actually the point, perhaps, in a way. The episode is about disconnection. It's Elle's disconnection from her home in Hawkins, from her identity and who she's building herself out to be in Hawkins, and from her purpose, which is clearly to navigate beating whatever is going on in the Upside Down in Hawkins. So this is the reason why the episode, I think, also feels disjointed, because it doesn't feel right in the same way that Elle's character feels off here, which is like she's out of alignment. This episode is showing that there's something out of alignment, and that being in alignment for Elle is being in Hawkins and being with these people. The cultural irony, of course, is that the Lost Sister tries to give Elle her girl boss moment and accidentally reminded us that the best part of her story isn't about individualism. It is her interconnectedness. So Stranger Things at its core is a show about belonging. I will not shut up about this. It is my favorite part of the show. It is what is the best part of the show is when all of the characters are all together. So Elle's power might save the world, but her community is what is saving her and is her real superpower, is her ability to connect with these people and to forge a community in a group of people that are misfits and outcasts and nerds and freaks and geeks and all of that stuff. So yeah, this one is messy, but maybe that is the point too. Fun fact, this episode was originally going to be called The Lost Brother, and my uncle Rico, who lives out in California, he's an actor. He is incredible. He auditioned for this role, and I remember he almost landed it, and I think he went on a couple of callbacks. I don't really remember, and I guess I could have confirmed with him before I put this fun fact in the episode. But I remember being in his house in California in like 2016 or 2017. Maybe it was even earlier than that. I guess it wouldn't have been. I guess maybe it would have been 2016 or 2017. And he had just been in an episode of The Walking Dead. And we went to Universal and we did the Walking Dead walkthrough. And he got recognized when we went out to eat. And he's done a bunch of other really cool stuff. He's like worked in some films with Kevin Bacon. And he's awesome. But anyway, he auditioned for this. He was going to be the Lost Brother. I think it was like down to him and the girl that ends up playing Callie, and I think they ended up going in this direction with that instead. So pretty cool. Little fun fact, even though this is my least favorite episode. And honestly, like, I really sometimes think about it. I wonder if he ever, I don't know, because we're not like awfully close, but I wonder if he's ever like watched this season of TV when it came out and been grateful that he was not part of the worst episode of Stranger Things. So I will ask him and then get back to you guys. Retro Glow, which is the best 80s nostalgia. I don't particularly think that there is anything in this episode that stands out to me because a lot of it is spent like away from society, like in a warehouse, like bunch of stuff. And then Boombox Bliss, which to me, when I think about this episode, I think about this particular scene, which is when Dead End Justice is playing by the Runaways. This is when the crew is all in the van. It is like a montage. They're kind of like preparing for their mission. They're putting the masks on. Hate the mask. Hate it so much. They stop at the supermarket, all that kind of stuff, like to stock up. So that's a really good one. But another really good one for me, like I was going back and forth, so I'm just going to put it in here because I can do whatever I want because it's my podcast, is Runaway by Bon Jovi. I love Bon Jovi. I've seen him a million times in concert. He is by far, like when I was younger, I was much more into like classic rock. And even though I don't know, I wonder if Bon Jovi is considered like pop rock now. I don't know. Anyway, that's a conversation for a different day. But I think this is also just funny because she gets off the bus, you know, to Runaway, which is so perfect. And this song by Bon Jovi is playing, and Bon Jovi will go on to be Millie Bobby Brown, who plays Elle. He will go on to be her father-in-law. She's married to his son. All right, Chapter 8, The Mind Flayer, written and directed by the Duffer Brothers. So this is where Stranger Things stops playing around. Like, this is the episode that is like the creme de la creme of Stranger Things viewing. The Mind Flayer is by far the scariest episode of season 2. So we open right where we left off in episode 6, at Hawkins' lab, the fluorescent lights. It is the clinical heart of the town's collective denial. It is a place that is always promising answers, but mostly delivering disaster. So this is where we pick off. The Demodogs are on the loose. The scientists, this feeling of the Demodogs versus the scientists is very Jurassic Park coded. I love Jurassic Park. I love that they touch on Jurassic Park so fucking much in this show. It's one of my favorite 80s properties ever of all time. So, and then we'll get like some Back to the Future stuff next season, which is also one of my favorite properties. Anyway, the same people who thought that they could control the Upside Down, aka these scientists, Dr. Owen's team at large, are just being picked off one by one by these Demodogs. So this is Stranger Things villainy kind of at its best. Because the monsters are terrifying, like Demodogs, and like the idea of the Demogorgon is scary, but the real horror is human arrogance, or this idea of like human absolution from the problem, like no control over the problem at all. So these are people, obviously like Dr. Owen's people, who thought that they could contain chaos, that they could study it, that they could monetize it. And the result is exactly what happens when control turns into delusion. And then you have the idea of body horror that is happening within this episode to Will Byers. So Hopper's there, he's trying to get everyone out, and I swear you can feel his whole protector complex vibe vibrating off of him. His fear for the people that he loves, especially for Elle, even though she's not physically there, is written all over his choices. Meanwhile, we get a taste of the hive mind mechanics, how every demodog, every bit of creeping rot, every twitch in Will's body is tied to the singular unseen entity, the Mind Flayer, the ultimate puppet master. And this idea of the puppet master is one that will follow us well into season 3 and definitively into season 4. So it starts here. The language doesn't come in until season 3, but I'm putting it in here. The ultimate puppet master. Control is seemingly its end result, but not through brute force. It is through connection, through the dark side of connection. And that is what I think makes part of this body horror and the mental horror of what is happening to Will Byers so terrifying, because so much of this show is about connection, about belonging. And here we're seeing that being connected to this thing is like a manipulation of that in a way. To counter that, the episode also has a lot of really strong beats about turning love into strategy and using the connection that they have with Will to fight the Mind Flayer. So first and foremost, I think Joyce Byers deserves an honorary PhD in holding it together while the world burns, because they realize that the Mind Flayer can spy through Will. And despite that, despite her kid being possessed by an interdimensional hive mind, this woman still got the presence of mind to tie him up to a chair and start problem solving. And what's so powerful about Joyce is that she's been gaslit, dismissed, and patronized since episode 1 of the TV show, since the very first episode. So Joyce using her connection to Will as a means to beat the monster at its own game is so good. They decide to do an old school spy movie move. They change the location and disguise the location so that it is unrecognizable to Will based off of his naked eye, since they know that the Mind Flayer can see what's going on around him. They also start using Morse code. This is started by Will, and then they're using the walkie-talkie to kind of code it back to the people in the house. And they're using storytelling and love to connect with the real Will and cut through the noise of what the Mind Flayer is doing to him. And you can feel how tragic this is for Joyce in particular, because her strength comes with a cost consistently. The cost of disbelief from pretty much everyone around her all of the time. Every single time that she's right, it's because something terrible has happened and no one listens until it's too late. So her motherhood is something that doesn't ever really get glorified, but weaponized, because even though she's saving her son, it's also living proof every single time that she has to do it, that she is the only one who is seeing a truth and is permanently misunderstood by pretty much everyone around her until it escalates to a certain point. Which is, by the way, what makes some beats in season 3 quite annoying. We'll talk about that in a couple episodes. Will is tied up, he's trembling, and this is what is the emotional core of the episode, or at least one of them. His possession is less about horror and more about helplessness. It is a loss of agency. So watching him flicker between his own voice and the Mind Flayer's sort of dialogue is really great acting. Noah gets to do so much incredible work here in season 2. I'm hoping that they give him a lot more to do in season 5, because I think, honestly, it's a grave mistake. He gets underutilized in season 3 and season 4. Again, we'll talk about it. But even in the way that Noah does his eye acting here, like, there is something, like, you can almost see his eyes glossing over. It's really incredible acting. Noah does an incredible job in this season. It is so good. It is so good when you see, like, his eyes just gloss over and the resignation that the Mind Flayer is just taking back over. There is something almost holy about character of Will fighting back. It's very subtle. It is a twitch of his finger. It is a blink. It is a breath that doesn't belong to this monster, but it is there. And it's amazing how Noah, the actor, can kind of switch so fast between these different beats of Will Byers, the boy, and Will Byers being possessed by the Mind Flayer. To me, Will and 11 are mirrors across seasons. Both have been used as vessels by forces bigger than themselves. Both are constantly fighting to reclaim control over their lives. Both have been traumatized by what has happened to them in their experience with the Upside Down. And this is what makes this episode in particular so powerful, is that Will is being forced to surrender to this thing that is happening to him. And it's not weakness, it's survival. And there are so many times when we see Elle fighting back, and it's not brutality, it's survival. I love that they get to be parallels or like foils or mirrors to each other in certain ways as their characters grow and evolve. It's just so deeply human and so recognizable that sometimes you cannot fight what is happening around you. You just have to hold on long enough for the people that you love to be able to reach you or care for you or support you or see you through it or whatever. So I find this to be a larger metaphor for community and care, especially when they get into this storytelling and they start talking about Mike and Will in the beginning of their friendship and how Joyce is explaining that Will was always so compassionate and so kind and gave his toys away. And I just love that we get all of this storytelling. It's so emotional. It makes me emotional each time I watch this episode. And I think it's one of my all-time favorite scenes across Stranger Things. Okay, let's talk about the Mind Flayer itself, because the episode finally gives it a shape. Not just as a physical shadow monster shape, but more as a metaphor, because it's not really here to kill, it's here to control. This is what's so terrifying about the Mind Flayer. And this is what I think makes the Mind Flayer such an incredible villain. It's so scary because it doesn't speak. It doesn't have a voice. It's speaking through Will, and we don't really know what it wants. Which is kind of terrifying. So that kind of strips the individuality of a villain that we typically get, where villains can often be complex and nuanced, and we often enjoy villains. Even if we don't like their characters, we often enjoy seeing our heroes up against them because we can understand there is a discrepancy in ideology. So like Batman and Joker, or Superman and Lex Luthor, we understand that there are two schools of thought and they are being pitted against each other. And oftentimes we can understand both sides, even if we're going to support and side with our hero. And I think what's so terrifying about the Mind Flayer is that you don't know. You don't really know. There's something almost primal about it in the way that Will describes it and describes what the Mind Flayer is trying to do, but we don't actually really know what its end goal or its objective is. The hive mind in particular is also something I find interesting because I think it hits way too close to home in the way that it feels almost like algorithmic control or toxic groupthink or the patriarchy or any structure that we are experiencing in our modern society right now that pretends to offer safety but thrives on obedience. And that's what the Mind Flayer does really well. It's what happens when the fear of the unknown becomes so unbearable that we would rather surrender to someone else's authority than face it ourselves. Let that sink in for you and where we are in this world right now. And that makes Will's struggle throughout this episode so profound because it's internal and it's psychological. This is what I mean when I say Stranger Things is at its best when it is psychological horror. The Demogorgons are scary, sure, fine. The goop is gross and disgusting, but the real villain is the idea of losing yourself to something bigger and something that you may never get back, your autonomy. And since we don't know the motives of the Mind Flayer, again, truly, that's fucking terrifying. So let's go back to the lab. Hopper's trying to get the power back on. It's pure chaos. It's dark. The alarms are blaring. The lights are flaring. People are dying. And yet Hopper is moving like a man on a mission. That man has the savior complex the size of Hawkins. And that's what makes his relationship with Elle so complicated, because even though she is not in this episode until the very end of it, her absence is felt here. We need Elle. She's missing. So every time that Hopper barks an order or refuses to slow down, you can feel the shadow of his fear. This guy is haunted by loss. He is riddled with guilt. He is so distraught about what has happened to Sarah. He is so fearful about losing Elle and what will happen to Elle if he can let go of control just even a little bit. And his own failure, or his rather guilt about what he experiences as his failure weighs on him so profoundly that it translates into his experience of control in and of itself. And there is a scene where Hopper and the others are trapped, like in a surveillance room. The demodogs are outside, the lab is in ruins, it's claustrophobic, it's frantic, and that's what's fascinating about him in this scene is he is so calm. He really does well under pressure. And it's so interesting because part of that, I'm sure, is training, but you wonder how this fear of loss motivates a deep desire to remain in control, even in chaos, so that there is the highest success of coming out of it on the other end. And we see it in season 1, and you see it a little bit less in season 2, but like in season 3 and season 4, you see it again. Hopper is very strategic. He's a very, very deep thinker. Is very strategic in the way that he thinks and he fights in these battles. So it's really interesting to see how calm he is. Again, I just find it fascinating. Hopper shines in chaos. It's only in disaster that he knows what to do, which is so fascinating. And in these slower, calmer moments, seems to struggle with them a little bit more, particularly again in season 3. We'll talk about that. Which, I mean, same as far as like only knowing what to do. And then, of course, we get the death of Bob Newby, gone but never forgotten. Justice for Bob. It's a very graphic and gory death, but ultimately he is sacrificing himself for this greater cause and for Will and for Joyce. So we go back to the Byers group, the kids that are there. We get the message in this episode from Will himself and the Mind Flayer that they need to close the gate. It's very simple. Of course, this is a huge relief until they realize that the Mind Flayer knows where they are because the phone starts ringing. And now they are well aware that the Byers house is going to be under attack, that the demodogs have found them, and that the group is starting to barricade the doors and clutching their weapons, and chaos is happening everywhere. It feels hopeless. And then the door bursts open and enter 11. The prodigal daughter returns. The whole tone shifts from terror to awe. And this is why 11's timing here is perfect. She is hope incarnate. She is quite literally the missing link. The group finally feels whole again. Stranger Things at its best is when all of the groups kind of converge, whatever episode that happens in. And for this beat, for this end of the episode, just seeing her there, even though they haven't had their reunions yet, we'll get that next episode, this is when the show is the strongest. It's not just that they need Elle, it's not just that she is the strongest, it's that she represents a balance in the group of the different types of power that all need to come together in order to beat the Mind Flayer, because they all bring a unique quality to this dynamic. So she is the reminder that no one fights alone, and that at the end of the day, when she steps in the doorway, it is not about her rescuing them. It is about a restoration of the community as a whole. So yes, it's a little bit campy. It's definitely dramatic, but that's Stranger Things. And it is one of my favorite parts of the show. So the retro glow for this episode is basic, the coding system that they talk about. And the boombox bliss is The Four Horsemen by Metallica. Now, there's a lot of really good music in this episode, too. I think because I've chosen The Clash before, Should I Stay or Should I Go, even though I love that montage of them doing the Morse code and getting the message about closed gate and telling the stories and whatever. Like, I love that whole stretch of the episode. It's one of my favorite things. But The Four Horsemen by Metallica is what Billy is listening to as he's getting ready for his date, and he's kind of, like, looking in the mirror, and he, like, takes the cologne and like sprays it down his pants, and he's smoking and he's kind of like looking at himself in the mirror. I think it's such a great scene, and Metallica will continue to be important for Billy's character as we move forward in the story. I said it. Chapter 9, The Gate, written and directed by the Duffer Brothers. The biggest emotional beat of this episode, for me at least, comes right at the beginning of the episode with Mike confronting Hopper about hiding Elle. This scene wrecks me emotionally, like literal sobbing tears, every single time. There are certain things, as I've gone through the whole rewatch at this point, I've walked all the way through the end of season 4. There are a few times that I like really had to pause because I was crying like really, really hard. And number one, it makes me very nervous for season 5. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of holidays ruined by the soundtrack of my sobbing tears. But also, I was surprised at how emotional I was about these characters. I guess I'm not surprised, but I am surprised. I don't remember crying that much as I was going through these, but I suppose it's been a decade long and you watch a lot of stuff and you don't necessarily remember. So there was a lot of stuff that did emotionally catch me off guard. I knew this was coming, but I was still really taken by this scene and a lot of scenes that will come up in future episodes as we go through season 3 and 4. Mike has been carrying the weight of everyone else's trauma, and Mike is an interesting character to follow from season 1 to season 4 in his arc, and it'll be interesting to see what his character development will be in season 5. He is the leader to his friends, and he's not particularly close with his family, so he doesn't have a ton of people to lean on, because he's kind of the one that his friends lean on. But he finally breaks here. He starts hitting Hopper, and that hitting turns into sobbing, and his anger at Hopper is just his grief with nowhere to go. This has been a really profound year for Mike. His best friend went missing. Then they thought the best friend died. They found this random girl who's got psychic powers. Then he lost her, even though he gained Will back. Like, there's just been, like, a lot that's happened that you have to process and digest over the past year, and it doesn't really seem like he has anyone to go to, and he seems like someone who kind of emotionally represses anyway. But we can see from, even in future seasons, like, he's not that close with his mom and his family, and even with Nancy, like, he doesn't really have these close relationships with his family, and he's the leader of his friend group, so they're coming to him, or he's kind of being the one to, like, click pieces together and drive a story forward, but he's not necessarily got a lot of places to go to, like, express his emotions. So his tears in this episode feel like the first time that someone has seen him, has given him space to feel all of the heavy things that have happened over the course of the year. And I don't know, it just makes me cry every single time. And Hopper's response is so great because he is so willing to accept the crash out so long as it means that the heat doesn't fall on Elle. And this is what is so, again, beautiful about it. He's like, it's fine, blame me all you want, just don't blame her. And Mike's like, I don't blame her, I blame you. I blame you. And it's a real growing pain for Hopper, I think. It forces him to consider what happens if he tries to parent through tenderness instead of fear, because he ends up sort of taking the brunt of the anger and then sort of softening into Mike and consoling him. I think it really helps Hopper in this moment understand something about how he wants to parent, especially after his fight with Elle from earlier in the season. You know, he's so terrified because he's never gotten this far with Sarah, and I think it just cracks open this bigger question that the show likes to poke and prod at, which is, how do you love something or someone without possessing it? And I think this is something that Hopper is going to struggle with as a parent in this season and also next season. Then we have the ever iconic Karen's bathtub moment. She's listening to The Way We Were, which is one of my favorite songs and one of my favorite movies, another one that makes me cry. She's got her paperback romance novel. She is basking in candlelight. It is a portrait of suburban repression and of a woman who has traded her passion for stability. And now she finds herself haunted by what she has given up. And then we have Billy entering the scene with all of his 80s hot rod energy. But it isn't really the point. Billy's not really the point here. He's the fantasy of liberation for Karen. It is Karen's near affair that tells us that she wants to feel alive again in a house that has been emotionally dead for years. Then we go back to the cabin, and Max and Elle have this tension that hits on a nerve because it is painfully true to girlhood. There is a lot of jealousy, comparison, and an ache to be chosen that is happening between these two girls. Elle brushing past Max feels very petty on the surface, but beneath it there is a truth to this kind of socialization, which is that girls are taught to compete for attention, particularly male attention, before they are taught to connect. And this is what Elle perceives as Max. She perceives Max to be somebody that has taken her spot in the group with her friends, and is somebody who has taken her spot with Mike, a boy that she has feelings for, and that she thought had feelings for her. So we've gotten this scene, and then the groups kind of split up, and we get Jonathan and Joyce and Nancy sweating out the Mind Flayer of Will. They like sort of make Hopper's cabin into a sauna. It's a literal exorcism through heat but it is also a lot about communal healing and, again, not being believed. Joyce has this like inner feeling. She's like, I just got to keep going. And Jonathan's like, you're killing him. Another very heart-wrenching scene. This scene is always very trauma-coded. More than other seasons, I think this scene has a lot going on for it. And again, Noah is so incredible here as an actor. And this is how Stranger Things reframes trauma, not as an individual scar, but as something that can be faced together with the people that you love and care about that are holding you and seeing you through something, even when it's hard, even when it's difficult, even when you want to give up because you feel like it's literally almost going to kill you. But then it leaves his body and he gets to cool down and Will gets to come home to himself. It's why this group keeps coming back together. Literally all of the different categories and like misfits in this group continue to come together because it is something that can only be faced together, and each one of them plays an important role in facing this larger monster together. Meanwhile, Elle and Hopper go to the Mother Gate. That's not just a plot point, it's an emotional closure. There's a reason why it's called the Mother Gate. We get this image of Brenner throughout the season telling Elle that she has a wound, a terrible wound, right? Which, of course, has to do with the gate itself. But the Mother Gate as a metaphor and a bridge to Mama and this idea of her mother and being curious earlier in the season when Hopper is reading to her and she's like, do I have a mama? And he's like, your mama's gone. And then she finds out she's alive and she goes through this whole journey, right? So quite literally, Mother Gate. And no coincidences either, or maybe perhaps this is coincidental, that everything in the Upside Down, every portal to the Upside Down happens to be vaginal. We'll just leave it at that. So much of this season for Elle is about her path to self-discovery. It is the hero's journey, which includes the hero leaving home, a truth being revealed, and then coming back home with a broader sense of understanding of yourself. And that's what happens here. Elle goes on a path of self-discovery. She discovers her history. She quite literally comes back bitchin'. And for Elle to close the Mother Gate is for her to close the part of her that was searching for answers about her mother, about her lineage, and for her to tie up this bow with Mama and the storyline with Mama and Terry Ives for good. And her doing that feels very apropos because it is later in this episode that Hopper will officially adopt her. And speaking of Hopper, he finally lets her take control of her own power. And Elle finally steps into it. She closes the gate in one big rage yell, right? We sort of see the Mind Flayer kind of trying to get through and then being pushed back and sort of peeping Elle behind the gate, behind the veil. And we have an understanding here that the monster is not dying, but that it is being exiled from Hawkins by her having this reclamation of her autonomy and her power, and for this creature that is desperate to possess and control and take over, this feels like a real win for Elle. We also have an incredible sequence between Steve with the kids at the buyer's house and Billy showing up, and he's like, is that you, Harrington? And he's like, yeah, don't cream your pants. It's a very funny part of the episode. It gives us a little bit of that Steve delight that brings a little bit of levity to the situation. And he's looking for Max, and he starts to beat the shit out of Steve, because what is a season of Stranger Things if not Steve Harrington's face getting beaten to a bloody pulp? And this group has to get on to the next part of their plot, their plan, right? They want to go and help in the tunnels, but they can't, what with Billy in the way. So Max takes one of the syringes that they use to knock out Will and uses it to knock out Billy, and has a power of reclamation herself, that Billy has been a bully to her this entire season, and she takes the nail bat and she swings it in between his crotch, and she's like, say you understand! Like, she's got this incredible moment, and it ends up coming back a little bit later because we see them at the house when she's getting her hair done by her mom for the snowball. She makes eye contact with Billy and he sort of like keeps it pushing. So we know that there's something that is a power balance between these two in this moment. And then Max drives the car and takes them to the tunnels, and this is an incredible sequence. We get like Steve bleary-eyed, all fucked up, probably somewhat concussed, waking up in the car, discovering that Max is driving and is freaked out. And then we got like Dustin kind of like nurturing him. He's like, shh, like, don't move too much. Like, and then they get to the upside down and they're going to go into the tunnels and do their work there. And then last but not least, obviously all of these different groups come together. The Mind Flayer gets out, yada yada. We see the smoke monster part of the Mind Flayer leave Will's body and kind of go up into the sky. And then we get the snowball sequence, something that was being teed up for us in season 1. And we get a nice little glittering moment of hope. We get Lucas and Max sharing their first kiss, Elle and Mike sharing their first kiss, Nancy dancing with Dustin after a heartbreaking scene of him being rejected multiple times by the girls in his grade, and obviously having a little bit of a crush on Max and watching her choose Lucas. But Stranger Things never really lets us forget that healing and horror exist in the same frame. So we get this incredible shot of the school, the Mind Flayer we get this incredible cinematic shot. It's the police is playing. It sort of pans out of the dance, pans back and looks at the school, Hawkins Middle, and then slowly as the song keeps going, just tilts us into the upside down, where we get the red frame of, the sky in the background that is giving the upside down vibes. And we've got the upside down version of Hawkins Middle. And then we've got the Mind Flayer just right over the school. Just like its little Mind Flayer head, just like looking at the school right there. The veil is very thin between these two worlds, and we've got a pissed off Mind Flayer that Elle shut the gate. So the retro glow for this episode is the Farrah Fawcett hairspray, and the Boombox Bliss is Every Breath You Take by the Police, because this is what I think about when I think about the snowball scene. All right, let's crack open the burn book, where we will look at the superlatives for this episode. The Bold and Bothered Award is strictly for the Femme and the Furious, and it goes to the quote or the moment that really relays feminine rage, and in this episode it goes to Callie. Just everything about her. The Shiro Award. This award goes to the baddie who is the most inspiring or the moment that is the most empowering, and in this episode it goes to one Nancy Wheeler for dancing with Dustin at the snowball. The Femme Fatale Award, for the most smash the patriarchy moment of the episode, and it goes to Joy's screaming, "Get out of my son!" Speak Your Truth trophy, the best quote or line, and in this episode it goes to Steve Harrington, who, when they're trying to describe the Mind Flayer and what it does, goes, "Like the Germans." Very funny sequence. An honorary heartthrob, because I'm just a girl, okay, and I want to talk about the most swoon-worthy moments, and for this episode it goes to Mike. So they're having this interaction when she shows up to the dance, and he goes, "Do you want to dance?" And she goes, "I don't know how." And he goes, "I don't know either. Do you want to figure it out?" And then they go and they dance. I think it's really cute. I think it's really romantic. I think it's what's so charming about Mike in these early seasons. And that is it. Season 2 in the books. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Femme Furious. I will be back. I am not sure when. I'm moving to Paris on Tuesday. So I will be back with an episode of Stranger Things likely on Tuesday, but I'm not sure if I'll be on a Tuesday-Friday schedule for like a week or two. So I will definitely be back with our Stranger Things episodes. That will be back on Tuesday. That will be season 3, episodes 1 through 4. So, but I'm not sure if there'll be a Friday episode next week. Okay? Thank you so much, as always, for listening. And until then, stay bitchin'.